Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel and Mirz Hashem. Today we will be learning Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today on the very bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch on Lamed Beis, Amud Beis, Siman Reish Samach Aleph Sif Beis. Now, in the beginning of Sif Beis over here, the Mechaber is going to introduce to us a very basic halacha. He's going to tell us the halacha of Tosfos Shabbos. What's the halacha of Tosfos Shabbos? The halacha of Tosfos Shabbos is, it's not enough for us to keep Shabbos when Shabbos automatically begins. Shabbos is the seventh day of the week. At a certain time, Friday night, it switches from Erev Shabbos to Shabbos. It becomes Shabbos. All of the halachas of Shabbos automatically kick in. It is now Shabbos. That's not enough. We have to take a little bit of Erev Shabbos. We have to take a little bit of a day that would normally be Chayil, and we have to be Moisif Mechayil al HaKodesh. We have to take a little bit of Erev Shabbos and be Mekadesh it and make Shabbos a little bit early. That's the halacha of Tosfos Shabbos. Now, when we discuss the halacha of Tosfos Shabbos, right away the Mechaber is going to have to tell us, in order for you to know when you have to be Mekabel Shabbos that little bit early. So first, you have to understand Zmanim. You have to know when Shabbos would automatically kick in, when does the Shabbos day really begin, and then you know what time you have to add on. You have to take a little bit before that and accomplish Tosfos Shabbos, add on to Shabbos. But without knowing exactly what time Shabbos begins, you have no way of knowing when you have to precede that. When do you have to make Tosfos Shabbos? So then the Mechaber is going to launch a discussion on Zmanim. Now, most of that discussion we already touched upon in previous shiurim, so even though it's complex, it's not going to be complicated for us. If we have time, we'll take a look at a very yesodistic biur halacha over here that lays out what we know as the famous machlokes Rabbeinu Tam and the Gra, etc., etc. But for now, let's begin here. Lamed Beis, Amud Beis, bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Reish Samach Aleph Sif Beis. Our learning should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, Hanasunim Batzara Ubashivya Ha'imdim Bein Bayam Ubein Bayabasha Hamakayim Yirakem Aleihem V'Yitziim Mitzara L'Rvacha Me'afelu La'Oiro Mishibur L'Geula Hashta Bagala V'Zman Kariv V'Neimar Amen. Says the Mechaber, Yesh Oimrim Shetzarech Lahaisif Mechayil Al HaKodesh. There are those that say that there is a chiyuv, there's an obligation for us to add on Mechayil from weekday Al HaKodesh on to Shabbos, which is automatically Kodesh, which is, like I've said, you have to take a little bit of Erev Shabbos, a few minutes of Erev Shabbos, which normally would be Chayil. You have to take that time, be Mekadesh it, be Mekabel Shabbos, and by doing so, be Moisif Mechayil al HaKodesh. This is brought down in the name of the Rif, based on the Gemara in Yuma. Says the Mishnah Berurah, bottom of Lamed Beis, Amud Beis, Mishnah Berurah is cutting your tests. Shetzarech lahisif, we have to add on to Shabbos from Chayil. Says the Chavetz Chaim, this applies bein biknisasai. This applies when Shabbos comes in, so at the beginning of Shabbos. Ubein biyitziasai, so too when Shabbos is going out. On Motzei Shabbos, we're not supposed to do malacha at the second that the Shabbos day ends. Rather, we have to extend Shabbos a little bit, and the same way we have to be Moisef Mechayil al HaKodesh from Erev Shabbos going into Shabbos, we also have to be Moisef Mechayil al HaKodesh on Motzei Shabbos, and we have to take a drop of Sunday and be Mekadesh it with Kedushas Shabbos. But in that case, we don't have to do any kind of Kabbalah. We just don't make Havdalah yet. We're not Mavdil. We don't start doing Malacha. We wait a little bit longer. This halacha of being Moisef Mechayil al HaKodesh on Motzei Shabbos is spelled out in Siman Reish Tzadik Gimel Sif Beis Ayin Sham. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ve'ein al azman hazeh loy lav v'loy kares. This time of Tosfos Shabbos, this extra time that you're being Moisef Mechayil al HaKodesh, if somebody is Mekabel Shabbos early, so he's being Moisef Mechayil al HaKodesh, and he's over Chas v'Shalom, and he does Malacha during that time does not bring with it an Isser Kares. It doesn't even bring with it an Isser Lav. Ki im mitzvahs asay min HaTorah. Somebody who would do malacha during that time would be over on the mitzvahs asay of Tais Shabbos. But there's no Isser Kares, no Isser Skila, no Isser Lav for doing malacha during the Zman of Tais Shabbos. That's not to make it in any way lenient, but it doesn't carry with it an Isser Krisis, Isser Skila, even an Isser Lav. You would be over an Asay. Just as an aside, by the way, my Rebbe, Rebbe Feinstein, Zal sein gesund und stark, he likes to say, we're used to learning, where we learn in Gemaras, and we learn halacha like this, so we say, oh, it's not a lav, it's only an asay. So Reuben always says, put that in perspective. You know what an asay is? An asay is, you have a noble who's in the throne room with the king, and the king turns to this noble who's very close to him and says, you know what, can you do me a favor, go get me a coffee? And the guy's like, okay. And he walks out and he gets busy and he never brings the coffee. 4 hours later, he walks back into the throne room. The king looks at him and says, what happened to that coffee I asked you for 4 hours ago? Oh, yeah, I didn't do it. And the king turned to you. The king asked you to do something. You just blew it off. That's what it means to be over an asay. So, yeah, you're being over an asay. The Rosh Hashanah told you, Tais Shabbos. You go ahead, you do malacha during this month of Tais Shabbos. That means the Melech Malchei Amlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu asked you to do something, and you blew it off. So in no way is it kal. Says the Chavetz Chaim weiter. Where do we have this idea of Tais Shabbos? Where does this come from? Explains the Chavetz Chaim, V'olfinon b'Gemara Rosh Hashanah Tes Amud Aleph. This is based on a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah Daf Tes Amud Aleph. Midiksiv b'Yom HaKippurim, because the pasuk writes in the context of Yom Kippur, V'inisem es nafshay seichem. You should pain yourselves. This is a reference to the tinus of Yom Kippur. Now the pasuk spells out that Yom Kippur is the 10th day of Tishrei. So we're under no illusions when Yom Kippur Day is. We know that Yom Kippur Day is the 10th day of Tishrei. So if the Torah Kedosha tells us that part of Yom Kippur is a tainus, we know that we have to fast on the 10th day of Tishrei. But then we have a very strange pasuk. Midiksiv b'Yom Kippurim, the pasuk says about Yom Kippur, V'inisem es nafshay seichem, you should fast when? B'tisha l'chodesh, on the 9th day of the month, ba'erev, in the evening, may erev ad erev, from evening to evening, tishbesu shabbatchem, you should keep the Yom Tov of Yom Kippur and you shouldn't do any malacha. Now, this pasuk is very strange, because this pasuk says, when v'inisem es nafshay seichem, betisha, on the 9th day. So the Gemara over there says, v'amrinan, yachel betisha misanin. It sounds like you're supposed to fast on the 9th day. Now, if you're supposed to fast on the 9th of Tishrei, that would mean that you have to fast on the 9th of Tishrei and on the 10th of Tishrei. Because like I said, we know that Yom Kippur is the 10th of Tishrei, yet we have a pasuk that says over here, so it sounds like we got to fast 2 days, the 9th of Tishrei and the 10th of Tishrei. But the Gemara says, Talmud loymar, to teach me not that way, the pasuk says bo'erev. It says what? Betisha lachodesh, on the 9th day of the month, but not the whole 9th day of the month. Betisha lachodesh be'erev, in the evening. Oh, so what's the pasuk telling me? Pasuk's not telling me that you have to fast on the 9th of Tishrei. The pasuk's telling me that you have to start the tainus the night after the 9th. That's the night after day 9 going into the 10th. So the tainus starts by night. The tainus doesn't start on the 10th day of Tishrei in the morning. It starts the night after the 9th day of Tishrei, which is truly the beginning of the 10th day of Tishrei. Okay, says the Gemara weiter, Iba Erev. Oh, if we're going to follow this drasha, strictly, and we're going to say, oh, the pasuk is telling me that the tainus starts by night, Yochel Mishatakshach. So I would think, okay, so again, I only have to fast on the 10th, but I have to fast from the very beginning of the 10th. When's the very beginning of the 10th? Nightfall after the 9th. So Mishatakshach, that's when the time starts. Talmud loymar betisha. To tell me not that way, the pasuk made sure to say betisha on the 9th day. Really, the pasuk didn't have to say on the ninth day, the pasuk didn't have to make any mention of the ninth day. The pasuk could have said on the 10th day, when ba'erev, already in the beginning when the 10th day truly starts. Why does the pasuk mention the ninth day at all? B'tisha l'chodesh, on the ninth day of the month. So what the pasuk is telling me is, HaKetzad, explains the Gemara, Maschilu misanem miba'od yoim. You have to start the tainus while it's still the day of the ninth day. It's not enough to start the tainus exactly by nightfall after the ninth, going into the 10th. You have to actually start the tainus b'tisha on the ninth day. Why? Kedei lahoisif michael ala kodesh. With this pasuk, b'tish ala chodesh ba'erev, the Torah Dirshu is introducing to us the concept of being moisif michael ala kodesh, and the Torah Dirshu is telling it to be in the context of the fast of Yom Kippur. When do you have to start the fast? On the ninth day, but only ba'erev, all the way close to nightfall, going into the 10th. A little bit before nightfall, you have to start fasting and then continue fasting for the entire 10th day of Tishrei, and you have to be moisif michael ala kodesh. V'gam b'yitziyasai moisif. And by Yom Kippur, we also have to extend the tainus a little bit after nightfall, going from the 10th to the 11th. Midiksiv me'erev ad erev. Because what does the pasuk say? B'tisha l'chodesh ba'erev, and me'erev ad erev. So the same way you have to start the tainus erev a little bit early on the 9th of Tishrei, going into the 10th, you also have to extend it ad erev. You have to go a little bit further, and you have to go into actually the 11th. So you have to be moisef b'chal ala kodesh on both sides. Now, this is all in the context of Yom Kippur. How do we know that this applies to Shabbos? Says the Chafetz Chaim, the Gemara over there says, Umidiksiv tishbesu shabbatchem. In that pasuk we learned, it says tishbesu shabbatchem. Yalfinon, we learn out from there, the chol makom shenemar shvus. Anytime that the pasuk makes mention of shvus, Shabbos, Shabbosain, Kamay Shabbos v'Yom Tov, like by Shabbos, of course it says Shabbos, but by Yom Tovim also it says Shabbos Shabbosain. Gam kein tzarich lahaisif v'lishbais mimalacha. We always have to apply this rule, the need of being moisef mechail al hakodesh to the Isser Malacha whenever it says a lashon of Shabbos. Okay, so this is how we know that there's a concept of Tosefes Shabbos. Says the Chafetz Chaim, Uzman Tosefes hu al karchach koydem ben hashmashos. Now, if we have a halacha, if we have what we're saying now is a mitzvah say daraisa to be moisef mechayel ala kodesh, you can't accomplish that by taking a piece of ben hashmashos. Remember, we're going to have to get into the weeds of exactly when these manim are, but we know that there is an exact second when the calendar changes, when it changes from Erev Shabbos to Shabbos. We don't know exactly when that second is. There's a period of time called Ben Hashmashos. In English, we call it twilight. There's this certain amount of time that we have a Suffolk Yom, Suffolk Lila. We don't know. Is it still the day before, or is it already the nighttime, and it's already the next day? The calendar has already switched. That time is Ben Hashmashos. Now, don't tell me that you could accomplish Tosefes Shabbos by taking some of the minutes of Ben Hashmashos and starting to keep Shabbos during Ben Hashmashos. That doesn't make any sense. The Ben Hashmashos who Suffolk Shemahu Laila, because the time of Ben Hashmashos is a Suffolk. There's a chance that the time of Ben Hashmashos already is Shabbos. So by accepting upon yourself the Isser Malacha during Ben Hashmashos, you're not truly being moisef mechayel ala kodesh. It could be that those minutes are already minutes of kodesh. The chayav ale ashim talui. If somebody would do malacha during Ben Hashmashos, he would actually be chayav to bring a carbon ashim talui. A carbon ashim talui is the carbon that you bring when you have a suffix whether or not you were over on an issa krisis. So you bring a carbon ashim talui. If somebody would do malacha during Ben Hashmashos, Erev Shabbos going into Shabbos, he would be chayav an ashim talui, because there's a chance that that time is actually kodesh. So you can't accomplish being moisef michael ala kodesh by taking time from the Ben Hashmashos period. You have to take time from a time that you know for sure is Erev Shabbos. And be Makabel Shabbos and be Mekadesh it and make it Shabbos. That's how you have to be Mekayim Tosfos Shabbos. V'lo tzarich kralo sufei, we wouldn't need a pasuk to come give us a mitzvah say and tell us don't do malacha during Ben Hashmoshes. Of course you can't do malacha during Ben Hashmoshes. It's Safik Yom, Safik Laila. If you do malacha, then you have to be Karban Ashur Talui. So, behechrich, the Zman of Tosfos Shabbos comes before Ben Hashmoshes. Okay, very good. So, we've established the chiyuv of Tosfos Shabbos. We understand that we have to be Moisef Michael ala Kodesh. We understand that in order to do that, we have to take a certain amount of time that we know for sure is Chayil. We know for sure it's Erev Shabbos. And we have to be Makabel Shabbos a little bit early and take that time and be Mekadesh it with Kedusha Shabbos, which means not to do any malacha. Now, we've said, if somebody would chas v'shalom be over and do malacha during that time, he's a chayav kares, he wouldn't get ski lift or edim and hasra, he's chayav karbachatas, if he does a pishoy gig, he's not even a lav. But he was over on an asay. There's an asay of Tosfos Shabbos. Now, says the Mechaber, so when is this time? What time period are you supposed to take some time out of and use it to be Moisef B'Chayil ala Kodesh? Says the Mechaber here, the top line of Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph. Uzman Tosef Ezeh, the time for this, the time period that's a roi for Tosfos Shabbos, hu mitchilas hashkia. It begins with the time that we're going to call Tchilas Hashkia, the beginning of the sunset. What does that mean? She'ein hashemish nireis ala oretz. That's the time when the sun is no longer visible. The sun goes under the horizon. This is what we all call Shkia. We all call this sunset. When the sun goes down under the horizon, that's Shkia. Says the Mechaber, and the Mechaber calls that Tchilas HaShkia, the beginning of the Shkia, and we're going to see why. Again, the Mechaber says, what is the time that's roi for Tosfos Shabbos? Mitchilas HaShkia, it begins at the beginning of the Shkia, which is She'ein HaShemesh Nireis ala Aretz, when the sun is no longer visible on the earth, Ad Zman Bein Hashmoshes, until the beginning of Bein Hashmoshes. That's the time that you could use for Tosfos Shabbos. The Mechaber is saying you can't advance Tosfos Shabbos earlier than the Tchilas Hashkia. The time that you're going to use for Tosfos Shabbos has to have some aspect of already evening to it. It already has to be a time that's a roid to be considered the evening going into Shabbos. You can't do Tosfos Shabbos 11 o'clock in the morning on Friday. That's too much Friday. That's too much Erev Shabbos. There's no suffix at this time period either. But that's not roy even for Tosfos Shabbos. When could you start Tosfos Shabbos? It has to be after the beginning of Tchilas Shkia. And it has to be from then until Ben Hashmoshes. Because once you hit Ben Hashmoshes, we said that's already too late for Tosfos Shabbos. That's already Safik Yom, Safik Laila. How long is this time period from Tchilas HaShkia until Ben Hashmoshes? Says the Mechaber, V'azman hazeh shehu shloishes milin urevia. This is the amount of time it would take a person to walk 3.25 mil. Now we paskin that the time it takes to walk a mil is 18 minutes. Okay, so 18 times 3 is 48. So 3 mil is 48, and a quarter of a mil. A quarter of 18 is 4.5. 48, no, I mixed this up, I'm sorry. 54. So 54 minutes. I'm sorry, 54 minutes. Dry Molchai. 3 times 18 is 54. Basic math, Rabbi Isai. My apologies. So the amount of time it takes to walk a mil is 18 minutes. 3 mil is 3 times 18 is 54. A quarter of 18 is 4.5. So 3.25 mil is 58.5 minutes. That's what the Mechaber says here. V'azman hazeh, this amount of time, the time period that you could use for Tosfos Shabbos, is how long? Shu shloishes mil in a ravia. It's 3.25 mil. It's 58.5 minutes. That begins at Shkia. It begins at what the Mechaber calls Tchilas HaShkia, the beginning of sunset, which is what we call Shkia. Ratza la'asoi kuloi tesefes. If you want to be Makabel Shabbos at Shkia, and you want to make that entire 58.5-minute period Shabbos, you could. You could use that whole 58.5-minute period for Tosefes Shabbos. But, turning the page to Lamed Gimel Amud Beis, Ratz alaseis mimenu miktsas, but if you don't want to be Mekabel Shabbos so early, you want to be Mekabel Shabbos 50 minutes after Tchilas Hashkia, Ratz alaseis mimenu miktsas, you want to take a little bit of this time period and use it for Tosefes Shabbos, oise, you could do that too. You don't have to use the whole thing. As long as you add on a certain amount of time, a certain amount of time that was vadayoim before Ben Hashmashos, and use it to be moisef mechayil ala kodesh, and you use those minutes to be moisef mechayil ala kodesh. So let's just reiterate what the Mechaber said over here. So the Mechaber told us we have to do Tosefes Shabbos. The Mechaber is telling us what time period you're allowed to use for Tosefes Shabbos. Now, once it's Tzeis HaKechavim, once it's Vaday Laila, it's Shabbos. It's automatically Shabbos. So there's no Tosefes Shabbos over there. Several minutes, we're going to see how long. A certain amount of time before it's Tzeis HaKechavim, that's Ben Hashmashos. That's Safek Yom, Safek Laila. You can't use that time period for Tosefes Shabbos. It might already be Shabbos. So the time that you could use for Tosefes Shabbos is before Ben Hashmashos. How early could you go? Says the Mechaber, you can't go as early as you want. You can't wake up Friday morning. You can't daven v'sikin Friday morning, and after davening say, okay, I'm being Mekabel Shabbos now. I'm being machmir with Tosefes Shabbos. I'm making the whole Friday Tosefes Shabbos. The Mechaber says, no, you can't do that. When does the time period for Tosefes Shabbos start? The time period for Tosefes Shabbos starts at what the Mechaber calls Tchilas Hashkia. What's Tchilas Hashkia? Sunset. That's what he calls Tchilas Shkia. So you have 58.5 minutes that you could use for Tosefes Shabbos. The 58.5 minutes that starts with the Tchilas Hashkia, and it ends 13.5 minutes before Tzeis HaKechavim, and those 13.5 minutes are Ben Hashmashos, and then comes Tzeis HaKechavim, which is Vaday Laila. Now, do you have to be Mekayim Tosefes Shabbos with that whole 58.5 minutes? Are we saying that you have to be Mekabel Shabbos all the way at Shkia in the world of the Mechaber? No, you don't have to be Mekabel Shabbos all the way then. You just need to take several minutes. You need to take some time from this 58.5 minute time period. You have to take some time from that time period, which according to the Mechaber is Vadayim. You have to take some of that time, and he has to use it for Tosefes Shabbos. Now, just a word of caution. Everything that we're saying over here is Shitas HaMechaber, which is going according to Shitas Rabbeinu Tam, that holds that from Shkia until 58.5 minutes later is Vadayim. We don't paskin that way. So just caution. Okay? So now let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Turn back to Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph. Mishnah Berurah is Kat and Chaf. Mitchilas Hashkia. So the Mechaber is talking about this time called Tchilas Shkia. What is this Tchilas Shkia? Says the Mishnah Berurah. And we've discussed this previously, so I'm going to go through it, but I'm going to try not to, go it over and over and over and over again, because we've already discussed this. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Hu das Rabbeinu Tam, you should know that this is Shitas Rabbeinu Tam v'siyatoi, and those Rishonim who joined Rabbeinu Tam, the Svira Lahu, who they hold, the Shtei Shkioisein, that there are two different Shkias. We're used to talking about Shkia. You should know in the world of Rabbeinu Tam, there are two Shkias. What's the first Shkia? Mitchila nichseis hachama me'einenu. At first, the sun becomes covered from our eyes. V'shakas, and it sets. V'hu nikra tchilas hashkia. That's called the beginning of Shkia, sunset, when the sun goes down beneath the horizon. But according to the Rabbeinu Tam, that's still considered Vadayim. V'shoya k'dei shloisha milin u'revia mil. Then you have a time period of 58.5 minutes, 3.25 mil. V'adayin yoimhu. During those 58.5 minutes, according to Rabbeinu Tam, it's still yom. It's still day. You hear this? 58.5 minutes after Shkia, it's still day. Umei oz v'hala, and then at the 58.5 minute mark and on, maschil hashkia shnia. 58.5 minutes after Shkia, that now what happens is what's called the second Shkia. Shkia shnia. She'oz maschil hishaka ha'or legamri. that's already when it starts to become completely dark. We all know that after sunset, it's not completely dark. It's still light outside. Not light, but it's still light. There's still light outside after what we call Shkia. So says Rabbeinu Tam, after what we call Shkia, you still have 58 and a half minutes, which it's still Yom. You could daven mincha according to Rabbeinu Tam. You could eat shal shudis according to Rabbeinu Tam. And on Erev Shabbos, you could do malacha according to Rabbeinu Tam during those 58 and a half minutes, because it's still Yom. What happens 58 and a half minutes after Shkia? Now it gets dark. That's Shkia Shnia. V'hu nikra soif hashkia. That's what the Rabbeinu Tam calls either the second Shkia or the end of Shkia. The first Shkia is Tchilas HaShkia, the beginning of Shkia. 58 and a half minutes later is Soif HaShkia. V'nimshach zmano k'dei shir mahalach shloishes rivei mil. That time takes 3/4 of a mil, which is 13 and a half minutes. Shehu elef v'chamesh me'os amma, the time it takes to walk 1,500 amas, that's 13 and a half minutes, right? Because 3/4 of 18 is 13 and a half. V'hu ben hashmashas. That 13 and a half minutes is what we call ben hashmashas. V'achakach yoitzin shlosha kechavim beinanim shehem siman lalayla. 13 and a half minutes later, that's when you could see 3 kechavim beinanim, 3 medium-sized stars. This is what we call tzeis kechavim. V'nimtza, so it comes out, shaladaitoi, according to the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam, mitchilas hashkia tzeis kechavim, from the very beginning of Shkia, for what we call Shkia, until Vadai Laila, tzeis kechavim, he arbas milin, is 4 mil. V'ayin mach kesavdu b'samach, but Chavetz Chaim says, take a look at what we're going to write shortly, which we'll see in tomorrow's share. Taharbe Paiskin Chalken al zeh. Many Paiskim disagree with the Shitas Rabbeinu Tam, with Sfira Lahu, and they hold to miyad sheniskasa hachama me'einenu, that immediately when the sun goes beneath the horizon and we can no longer see it, hu ben hashmashas, that is the beginning of ben hashmashas, shu safek yom safek laila, that already is safek yom safek laila. So according to those Paiskim, Tais for Shabbos has to be before Shkia. And according to those Paiskim, if someone Chas Chalila does Malacha after Shkia, it's a Safek Daraisa. He would have to bring an Ashim Talui, because it's possible that already immediately after Shkia, Tchila Shkia, what we call Shkia, is already Mamish Shabbos. So Tais Shabbos would have to be advanced before that. After that is already Ben Hashmashas. Okay. We're going to review this a little bit, but first let's finish off the Mishnah Berurah here. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Mechaber said, you have this 58 and a half minute time period. Do you have to use the whole 58 and a half minute time period for Tais Shabbos? The Mechaber said, no. You want to make the whole thing Tais Shabbos? You want to stop doing Malacha right by Shkia, according to the Rabbeinu Tam, and use from Tchila Shkia to Sof Shkia, use that whole 58 and a half minute time period for Taisa Shabbos, Gesundheit. Ratzal says to Mishnah Berurah, Hainu al yedei dibur shuhu makabelei alav l'shem Taisa Shabbos. You would have to say so. You would have to verbalize. Right by Shkia, you say, I'm being makabel Shabbos. Okay. Or al yedei amiras baruchu, or you daven ma'ariv, and you say baruchu. That baruchu would serve as a Kabbalah Shabbos. Ukid l'kaman b'sif dalet. V'im mahani lo zeh Kabbalah b'leiv. How about if I don't verbalize anything? I don't say I'm being Makabel Shabbos. I don't say Baruch Hu. I don't say Mizmor Shir. I don't say Bay V'Shalom. I just think in my head I'm being Makabel Shabbos. Ayin l'kaman b'simin tafreish chesiv gimel b'hagah v'mishnah Berurah sham. V'ayin l'kaman b'reish samad gimel sif yud b'hagah d'min hagenu. According to our minig show, isha hamadlekes neris l'Shabbos he Makabel Shabbos ba'adlak kazu. This is a very important halacha for many people to know, for everybody to know, that we paskin that when a woman lights Shabbos licht, she's being Makabel Shabbos. Without even any kind of verbalization. When she lights Shabbos licht, she's Makabel Shabbos. The Mechaber said, you don't have to use this whole time period for Taisa Shabbos. Ezezman. You have to take Ezezman, some time, from this 58 and a half minute time period you have to take for Taisa Shabbos. For Leisagi by Safa Kolshu. The Chavetz Chaim says, not 30 seconds. You need a little bit more. When you take the 13 and a half minutes of Ben Hashmashas, and now you go before that and you do Tais Shabbos, when you add those times together, you get about a half an hour. V'ayin b'biur halacha. Take a look at the biur halacha. So let's take a look right away here on Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis in the biur halacha Dibur HaMaschal Ezezman. Ein b'Mishnah Berurah shekasavnu. The Chavetz Chaim says, take a look at the Mishnah Berurah where we wrote, the loisagi, it's not enough to take kolshu. You can't be Mekayim Taisei Shabbos with 30 seconds. Can't kasav a rush bebeitza, so says the Rosh in Masechtas Beitza, Perek HaMevi. V'huva bebeis Yosef. The Kasva Paiskim, the Paiskim write the Lois Bar Shiura min Gemara. From the Gemara, we can't discern from the Gemara precisely how long, at the minimum, this time of Ben Hashmasha should be, of Taisei Shabbos should be. The Nera, but the Chavetz Chaim says it would appear that Al Kal Panamu Pachas B'Kidei Shloisha Rivei Mil. It would be less than 13 quarters of It would be less than 3/4 of a mil. So less than 13 and a half minutes. And then he ends up over here. So the Mishnah Berurah said that if you take Ben Hashmashas and Taisei Shabbos, you get about a half an hour. Why? Because Ben Hashmashas, according to Rabbeinu Tam, is 13 and a half minutes. And Taisei Shabbos should be a little bit less, says the Chavetz Chaim over here. Or it's certainly not more than the Zman of Ben Hashmashas. It's certainly not more than 13 and a half minutes. So if you take 13 and a half minutes for Taisei Shabbos, and you take 13 and a half minutes for Ben Hashmashas, you're left with 27 minutes, which is almost a half an hour. Okay, now let's take a step back. So again, let's first review this Shita of the Rabbeinu Tam outside. So the halacha that we've learned today is a very, very basic halacha. The halacha is, don't think that Shabbos begins just when the 7th day of the week automatically begins at the second that the calendar flips from Erev Shabbos to Shabbos. Shabbos begins then. Now that's true. Shabbos does begin then. But you have a chiyuv of Taisei Shabbos. You have a chiyuv to be Meisif Mechayel Ala Kodesh. In order to be Meisif Mechayel Ala Kodesh, what do you have to do? You have to take a look at the clock, and you have to take some time that is Vadai Erev Shabbos. And you have to be Mekabel Shabbos a little bit early and be Meisif Mechayel Ala Kodesh. Now, can you do that with Ben Hashmashas? No, because the minutes of Ben Hashmashas are not Vadai Erev Shabbos. The time of Ben Hashmashas is a suffix. It could be it already is Shabbos. So you can't be Mekayim your chiyuv of Taisei Shabbos using the minutes of Ben Hashmashas. So in order to be Mekayim your chiyuv of Taisei Shabbos, you have to go before Ben Hashmashas, and you have to take a certain amount of time before Ben Hashmashas, be Mekabel Shabbos early, and be Meisif Mechayel Ala Kodesh. Could you go as early as you want? No, you can't go as early as you want either. The Mechaber is saying over here, how early could you go as far as the chiyuv of Taisei Shabbos is concerned? You could go till Tchilas Hashkia. That's when you could start being Mekabel Shabbos and be Mekayim Taisei Shabbos. From Tchilas Hashkia and on. And we've said here that the Mechaber is working in the world of the Rabbeinu Tam. How does the Shitas Rabbeinu Tam work? Shitas Rabbeinu Tam is ultimately very simple. The Rabbeinu Tam says, and he bases this on a Gemara in Pesachim. The Gemara in Pesachim says that from Shkia until Tzeis HaKechavim is the amount of time it takes a person to walk 4 mil. How long does it take a person to walk 4 mil? A mil is 18 minutes. 18 times 4 is 72. So we have a Gemara in Pesachim that says, from Shkia, from sunset, until Tzeis HaKechavim, which is Vadai Laila, that amount of time is 4 mil, 72 minutes. Okay. But there's a 13 and a half minute time period before Tzeis HaKechavim, before Vadai Laila, that's Ben Hashmashas. So according to Rabbeinu Tam, Tchilas Hashkia is at what we call Shkia. 58 and a half minutes, it's Vadai Yoim. Then comes Soif Hashkia, which marks the beginning of Ben Hashmashas. Then you have 13 and a half minutes of Ben Hashmashas, and then you have Tzeis HaKechavim, which is Vadai Laila. According to those calculations, what time period is available for Taisei Shabbos? Not the last 13 and a half minutes before Tzeis HaKechavim, that's Ben Hashmashas. It's only from the Tchilas Hashkia until the Soif Hashkia. From the beginning of Shkia, when the sun goes under the horizon, until the Soif Hashkia, when the light is gone from the sky, during those 58 and a half minutes, you could be Mekayim your chiyuv of Taisei Shabbos. But we know that Shitas Rabbeinu Tam. We know that the Gra and many others, and possibly including Rishonim, disagree with this Rabbeinu Tam, and they have a whole different calculation. So now, let's take a look here at a Biur Halacha. How much we'll be able to do right now, I'm not sure, but let's take a look at the Biur Halacha on Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph, Dibra Maschil Mitchilas Hashkia. This is such a yesoidistic Biur Halacha. This Biur Halacha will give you an understanding. So many people walk around, oh, Rabbeinu Tam, 72. Oh, the Gra doesn't hold 72. What's it all based on? Where does it all come from? How do we understand it? Here is the Biur Halacha, Rabbi Isaac. Says the Chofetz Chaim, Tam l'chol zeh. The rationale for all of this that the Mechaber is saying is as follows. Dihine b'psachim tzadik daled amud aleph, in Mesechtes Psachim, tzadik daled amud aleph, Isa, the Gemara says, the mishkia sachama ad tzeis hakechavim, from shkia until tzeis, shir arba milin, is the time it takes to walk 4 mil, aka 72 minutes. That's the Gemara in Psachim. Shkia until tzeis, 72 minutes. Beautiful. As beferish as you could get. But here's the problem. Ubishabis, Lamed Daled Amud Beis. I'm sorry, Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. But in Mesechtes Shabbos. No, it's both. It's going from Lamed Daled Amud Beis into Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. Isa, the Gemara says differently. Over there, the Gemara says, the Mishkia Sachama Maschil Ben Hashmoshes. The first thing that the Gemara in Shabbos says is, you should know that Shkia marks the beginning of Ben Hashmoshes. Va'amar Sham, and it says over there in the Gemara in Shabbos, the Meshech Ben Hashmoshes, that the time period of Ben Hashmoshes is Tlasa Rivei Mil, is 3/4 of a mil, which is 13.5 minutes. Va'achakach Hevi Laila, and then begins night. 13.5 minutes after Shkia is Vadei Laila. V'amrinan Sham, and the Gemara over there also says, Tishloisha Kechavim Beinanim Hevi Laila. That's the Zman of Tzeis Kechavim. 3 stars Beinanim. Im Kain Kasha Hadadi. So we have a major steer over here. We have one Gemara in Psachim that says Shkia, sunset. 72 minutes later is Tzeis Kechavim. 72 minutes later is Vadei Laila. Then we have a Gemara in Shabbos that says Shkia is the beginning of Ben Hashmoshes. How long does Ben Hashmoshes last? 13.5 minutes. What happens 13.5 minutes after Shkia? Tzeis Kechavim. Hold it. Is Tzeis HaKechavim 72 minutes after Shkia, or is Tzeis HaKechavim 13.5 minutes after Shkia? The Gemara in Psachim is telling me Tzeis HaKechavim is 72 minutes after Shkia. The Gemara in Shabbos is telling me Tzeis HaKechavim is 13.5 minutes after Shkia. Which one is it? Oh. Valkein Teretz Rabbeinu Tam. In order to answer this, the Rabbeinu Tam, V'siyatoi, and those who join him, say, Lechalek bein Shkia Sachama de Psachim, L'Shkia Sachama Shebes Sham. They answer this by saying that the Gemara in Psachim is referring to one Shkia, and the Gemara in Shabbos is referring to a different Shkia. And the Chofetz Chaim explains, Dahi de Psachim hu hascholas hashkia. The Gemara in Psachim that says that Tzeis HaKechavim is 72 minutes after Shkia, that's talking about the first Shkia. That's talking about Tchilas hashkia, the beginning of Shkia. Mishkias guf hashemesh, when the physical body of the sun goes down, kishenichnas ameinenu, when it's covered from our eyes, when it goes beneath the horizon. Umeyaz had Tzeis HaKechavim arba milin. From then until Tzeis HaKechavim is taka 72 minutes. And when the Gemara in Shabbos says that there's only 13.5 minutes from Shkia until Tzeis, Hu Soifa Shkia, that's talking about the end of Shkia. Shehu kishenishka gam ora shemesh meiroiv harakia levad letzad hamaravi. That's the amount of time when there's no light left in the sky except for right by the western horizon. Umeyaz maschil ben hashmoshes, that the soif hashkia, the second shkia, marks the beginning of ben hashmoshes. Shehu shloishes rivei mil kaidem tzeis HaKechavim, and that's 13.5 minutes before tzeis. Umehascholas hashkia shehu shkias guf hashemesh at soif hashkia hanal hu yoim. According to the Rabbeinu Tam, from the first shkia, the shkia of the Gemara in Psachim, the tchila shkia, until the second shkia, the shkia of Mesechtes Shabbos, that's Vadayim. V'hu meshech shloisha milin u'revia. And that's amount of time, that's 3 1/4 mil. That's 58.5 minutes. V'oz huzman toisefes Shabbos. And that's the amount of time that's available for toisefes Shabbos. U'kemoshe kosev kan b'shulchan aruch. Ubein kulam heimar ba milin. And together, all of these times give you 72 minutes. V'ad arba milin me'aschalas hashkia lo yeheva laila vadai. But for those 72 minutes, from the beginning of Shkia, what we call Shkia, until 72 minutes later, is not Vadai Laila. For the first 58.5 minutes, it's Vadai Yom. For the last 13.5 minutes of the 72 minutes, it's Ben Hashmoshes. Only 72 minutes later is it Vadai Laila. Zeu Shitas Rabbeinu Tam V'siyatoi. Now skip a little bit. Now says the Bir Halacha, Aval hagra zal chaylik al shitazu. But the gra is chaylik on this Rabbeinu Tam. The herich bekama rayas dishkia sachama shebeshabes le'inyan ben hashmoshes hu gam kein haschalas hashkia kama shkia sachama shebepsachim b'sham. The gra brings many rayas that when the Gemara in Shabbos says that shkia is followed 13.5 minutes later by ben hashmoshes, he's not talking about the soif hashkia, like the Rabbeinu Tam says. No, he's talking about the beginning of Shkia. The Gra says, no, don't tell me that from the beginning of Shkia until the soif hashkia is Vadayom. No, Ben Hashmoshes starts at the Haschalas hashkia, at sunset, when the sun goes down under the horizon. That's the beginning of Ben Hashmoshes. Umiyad hashkias guf hashemesh maschel Ben Hashmoshes. Al limud Rabbi Yehuda, the pasuk of Yechli Kavasei Lechom Rabbi Shabbos. Umeshach zman Ben Hashmoshes hu shloisha rivei mil. And Ben Hashmoshes is 13.5 minutes. The Kushya Hanal, and as far as the question, the steer between the Gemara in Pesachim and the Gemara in Shabbos, Tiritz lachalak bein tzeisak echavim de Shabbos letzeisak echavim de Pesachim. He says that the Gemara in Pesachim is referring to one tzeisak echavim. The Gemara in Shabbos is talking about a different tzeisak echavim. The tzeisak echavim de Shabbos, huzman shalayla shu shloishak echavim beinanim. When the Gemara in Shabbos says that 13.5 minutes after Shkia is tzeisak echavim, that means tzeisak echavim, 3 medium-sized stars. Tzeisak echavim of gimel kechavim beinanim, which is Vadai Laila. So according to the Gra, the Gemara in Shabbos is telling you, Shkia, what we call sunset, marks the beginning of Ben Hashmoshes. How long does Ben Hashmoshes last? 13.5 minutes. What happens 13.5 minutes after Shkia? Tzeisak echavim of gimel kechavim beinanim, and that's Vadai Laila. V'tzeisak echavim de Pesachim, when the Gemara in Pesachim says that tzeisak echavim is not 13.5 minutes after Shkia, it's 72 minutes after Shkia. What's that talking about? Hu tzeis kol hakechavim hanirim balayla. That's when you could see all the stars in the sky. Shehuz man mu'ucher harbe. That's much later. Vehev arba milin achar haschalas hashkia. And in a chinami, that doesn't happen until much later, until 72 minutes after Shkia. Now, why does the Gemara in Pesachim tell me about that tzeisak echavim? That tzeisak echavim, according to the Gra, makes absolutely no nafkamina lahalacha. The answer is, it's negayat to what the Gemara in Pesachim is talking about. It's negayat to the Gemara in Pesachim that's talking about the thickness of the rakia, but it's not, there's no nafkamina lahalacha. So to put it very succinctly, what we end up with is like this. We have a stira Gemara in Pesachim and a Gemara in Shabbos. We have a Gemara in Pesachim that says, Shkia, sunset, 72 minutes later is tzeisak echavim, which is Vadai Laila. 13.5 minutes before Vadai Laila is Ben Hashmoshes, which is Azman Safik Yom Safik Laila. Then we have a Gemara in Shabbos. Gemara in Shabbos says, Shkia, that starts Ben Hashmoshes. Ben Hashmoshes is 13.5 minutes, and then we have tzeisak echavim. So which one is it? Is Shkia the beginning of Ben Hashmoshes, and 13.5 minutes later is tzeis? Or do we have Shkia, and then 58.5 minutes, and then the beginning of Ben Hashmoshes, and only 72 minutes after Shkia is tzeisak echavim? Which one is it? Says the Rabbeinu Tam, we go like the Gemara in Pesachim. The Gemara in Shabbos. The Gemara in Shabbos means something else. The Gemara in Pesachim is telling you how it works. You have Shkia, what we call Shkia. For the next 58.5 minutes, it's Vadayom. Then you have 13 and a half minutes of Ben Hashmashas, and then you have Tzesek Kechavim. That's what we go like. When the Gemara in Shabbos says that the Shkia and 13 and a half minutes later is Tzeis, it's talking about the last 13 and a half minutes, right before Tzeis. Why is that called 13 and a half minutes after Shkia? Because it means after the end of the Shkia. Shkia starts at what we call Shkia, but Shkia doesn't end until 58 and a half minutes later when it's dark. That's the end of Shkia. 13 and a half minutes later is Tzesek Kechavim. That's how the Rabbeinu Tam resolves this. Now, the nafkaminas lahalacha are huge. According to Rabbeinu Tam, somebody does malacha after Shkia, it's still Vadayim. According to Rabbeinu Tam, Tais V'Shabbos, you could start Tais V'Shabbos a half hour after Shkia because it's still Vadayim. This is all Rabbeinu Tam, and the Mechaber is going according to the world of Rabbeinu Tam. The Gra says, no. The Iker is the Gemara in Shabbos. When the Gemara in Shabbos says Shkia starts Ben Hashmashas, he's not saying like Rabbeinu Tam, the end of Shkia. No, he means the beginning of Shkia. Like what we do. Shkia, sunset, the sun goes under the horizon. That's the beginning of Ben Hashmashas. How long does Ben Hashmashas last? 13 and a half minutes. 13 and a half minutes later, it's Tzeis. Whoa, this is much, much different. According to the Gra, if somebody does malacha a minute after Shkia, he's chayav and oshim talui. That's a zman suffik yom, suffik laila. It's a suffik krisus, it's a suffik skila. And only 13 and a half minutes after Shkia is Vadai Laila. Now, I'm not going to go through it now because we're out of time, but the Bir Halacha goes through. Wait a second. The Gra is telling me that Vadai Laila is 13 and a half minutes after Shkia? The Gra is telling me that 13 and a half minutes after Shkia, you could see 3 Kechavim Beinim? But we see that it's not that way. Explains the Chavetz Chaim, yeah. The Gra is telling you what the Gemara in Shabbos says. The Gemara in Shabbos is talking about in Yerushalayim and in Bavel, the latitude and longitude of Bavel and Eretz Yisrael. We all know that when we go to Eretz Yisrael, it seems to get dark much quicker. It's Shkia and then boom, it's dark. Astronomically, it works out that way. In the United States, let's say, it isn't that way. How long do you have to wait in the United States according to the Gra? So Rav Moshe said if you wait 50 minutes, 50, after Shkia, you're covered even for the longest days of the year. So that's why everybody says, according to Rav Moshe, Tzesek Kechavim is 50 minutes after Shkia. According to Rav Moshe, Tzesek Kechavim is 50 minutes after Shkia on the longest day of the year in the New York area. But in Eretz Yisrael and in Bavel, according to the Gra, it was only 13 and a half minutes after Shkia. Okay, we're going to stop over here because we're going to continue on this theme, Mirz Hashem, in the next shir as well. The Mishnah Berurah in tomorrow's shir is going to go through the Shitas HaGra. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Discuss of limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh Hashanah should send Yeshua's refuahs, Parnas, and Shadukim to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the B'yes Gal Tzedek, B'meher V'yameinu, Amen. Be well.